Hello everybody and welcome back to Custom Hearthstone Cards. If you noticed on episode 1 of my series, I had an annotation up for a while that I was looking for a new co-commentator. Well, the search is over, and I'd like to introduce you guys to Chocl8215.
Hello YouTube, I'm Chocl8215, and I will be joining Mimic Hearth on his Custom Hearthstone series.
So, last week I asked you guys to come up with some cards with interesting Battlecry abilities. I got a lot of good submissions, and from browsing the Custom Hearthstone subreddit, I found a lot more cards, and let's jump right into it. The first card that we've got for this week is Time Lost Proto-Drake. It's a 2/2 for 4 mana, and its Battlecry is to resummon a minion exactly as it was when it was originally summoned. Now, the wording on this card doesn't match Hearthstone perfectly, but I do like the ability. It allows you to get a creature back, and if the creature was silenced, all the abilities that it lost from being silenced are kind of scraped away because it's resummoned exactly as it was when it was originally summoned. Plus, Hearthstone doesn't have any cards that allow you to bring cards back from the dead, so I feel like that's something that we could really use.
Yeah, I like the ability on Time Lost Proto-Drake a lot. It, like you said, it negates silence, which is something I feel Hearthstone needs, sort of a counter-silence ability, and it also just has a lot of interesting connotations. It fully heals your minions, it can remove a buff from an enemy minion, you know, in some cases it can actually silence. I have to wonder though, would it trigger a Battlecry ability on a minion that you bounce?
That's a good question, and I'm not sure, although I was thinking Time Lost Proto-Drake is kind of an ancestral spirit for any deck, and it's more of a surprise too. As long as your opponent kills the minions in the order you anticipate, you can bring back any minion from the grave as if it had ancestral spirit on it.
That is a very interesting idea. I hadn't really thought of the ancestral spirit connotation, but yeah, that's true.
Okay, and our next card?
Yes, our next card, onto the Tauren Beastmaster. The Tauren Beastmaster is a 3/4 hunter card for 6, with Battlecry summon a 3/2 tiger with charge. In total, it's a 6/6 stats for 6, but it's divided, and also 3/2 of those stats have charge, making it a bit more offensive than, say, a Boulder Fist Ogre, but overall the same stat line. But I do like the connotation of a warrior summoning a beast as his ally, and I think Tauren Beastmaster does this pretty well. A very nicely balanced card, and I don't think it would see play just because of Savannah Highmane, but I like it.
Yeah, that's very true. There's not a lot of cards that can compete with Savannah Highmane's mana slot, but I like it when a card splits up its attack and defense between 2 cards, because not every deck can deal with 2 minions as effectively as it could get rid of 1, like a Rogue's Assassinate, for example. Plus, this card already passes the vanilla test by being a 6/6 for 6, and half of it gets charge. So, in the end, it's really well balanced. This card could totally make it in, and it even synergizes really well with the rest of the Hunter cards.
Something else that I do like about Tauren Beastmaster is the Beastmaster itself has a lot of health, but the Tiger does not, so it's less vulnerable to things like Cleave, but bigger AoE to take out both of them in one card would be a lot more expensive than the Beastmaster itself.
Oh yeah, that's true. I hadn't thought about that. Usually minions with charge do have less health, so it works on that level too. The next card we've got for you is Frostworm. It's a 7/7 for 7. And the Battlecry is freeze a random character. Now, obviously, this could backfire, and you could freeze yourself or one of your minions, but you could also get a free freeze on an enemy target, especially if they only have a couple minions out or just one. It already passes the vanilla test by being a 7/7 for 7.
I actually am not a huge fan of this card. It does a slightly weaker effect than Frost Elemental for a little higher stat line, and it's somewhat already in the game, but I do like that it is different in that it freezes a random character and has better stats for the cost than Frost Elemental. So it is unique enough, but I fear it maybe is slightly too close.
Yeah, that's true. I see where you're coming from on that one. But who knows? This card might make it into play. We'll have to wait and see. And our next card,
Our next card, Mankrik. 4 for a 4/4 legendary, charge. With Battlecry, deal 1 damage to all characters. Mankrik is a neutral legendary, despite him having quite a lot of synergy with the warrior. Mankrik is an interesting card, in my opinion. It's Chocl Elite with a Whirlwind stapled to it. If my mind serves me properly, Mankrik will not deal 1 damage to himself when he is summoned, and I feel that 4 is a little too low for Mankrik. I think 5 or possibly even 6 for this effect might be worth it, but I think 5 would be best, especially considering it's a neutral card. And I really like Mankrik, though. He can trigger enrage effects on your own creatures, he can take out a lot of little enemy creatures, he's nice in mid-range, right where you want a lot of that area of effect, and can also function as a pseudo-swipe.
Yeah, I agree. A lot of the things you brought up about Mankrik were the same things that I wanted to talk about. He's basically a Chocl Elite with Whirlwind. However, he's a Whirlwind that also affects heroes. He's got great synergy with warriors. You know, he activates enrage abilities. If you have something like a Gurubashi Berserker, there's a free +3 attack on him. He also can pop enemy Divine Shields and get rid of their smaller minions, like you said. But I do agree, I feel like his mana cost should be 5 or 6, especially because he is just a Chocl Elite with an extra ability stapled onto him.
Yeah, overall I think he's a bit too powerful, but I do like the idea of a Mankrik.
Next up, we've got Totem Chieftain, a 1/3 for 2, and the battle cry is it gains attack equal to the number of totems on the board. I was looking at this card earlier trying to figure out where it would be super viable, and unfortunately there's no cards that summon more than 1 totem for shamans. There's no way to get totems on the board faster, except, you know, using the coin to get maybe your mana spring out faster, but for the most part, this guy won't be incredibly useful until turn 3 or 4 in my opinion. He does pass the vanilla test by being a 1/3 for 2, but there's a lot of class cards that are a 1/3 for 1 with a better ability. Mana Worm, Northshire Cleric. The only way I could see this guy being really useful and worth the extra mana would be in a Shaman versus Shaman matchup, because it is all totems on the board, not just on your side.
I do really like Totem Chieftain. He may be a bit on the weak side, but I think his effect is very strong. Perhaps changing up his effect a little bit to all totems gain +1 attack would make him a little bit stronger and just sort of fulfill the role of the chieftain in his title, you know, him being a lord of totems, empowering up your totems, rather than the totems empowering him.
I agree, having him give 1 attack to all totems would make him a lot more of a threat than just him gaining attack, because he's still vulnerable to Lightning Bolt, he's vulnerable to Eviscerate, even Backstab with a dagger. He can be taken out really easily, and the highest I could see his attack getting in his current state would only be 3 or 4 at best. But he is an interesting card, I really like the flavor, and I do think shamans need more totem play or cards that work off how many totems they have.
Quite true, quite true. On to the next card, I believe. Here we have the Giant Buzzard. 4/3 for 6, another hunter minion for 6. Battlecry, draw a card for each beast you control. Sort of the pseudo-starving buzzard. I guess this one's eaten so much that he doesn't have to wait around for other minions to be summoned. I like the Giant Buzzard for a lot of reasons. Number one, it gives hunters another good viable option on turn 6. Savannah Highmane is very strong, but just having that one option can be a bit boring. Giant Buzzard, on the other hand, is, even if you play him naked, it's still a 4/3 that draws you a card, which isn't the worst thing for 6, but if you add in just 1 or 2 beasts, you can actually get a lot of card advantage off of Giant Buzzard, and I think it's a really strong follow-up play to Unleash the Hounds or Snake Trap, anything.
When I look at Giant Buzzard, I see a Gnomish Inventor with 1 more toughness and 2 more mana cost. If you have a few beasts on the board, he can be really powerful, but the thing about Starving Buzzard is, since it's so cheap, and Unleash the Hound, even with its 3 mana nerf, that's still only 5 mana, and it would normally draw you more cards than Giant Buzzard would. So, it's not terrible because it is a guaranteed amount of draw, but it's only a one-time thing. Whereas with Starving Buzzard, you can combo it with Unleash the Hounds, and after that draw, who knows what else you could play and get even more draws out of it. The thing about Giant Buzzard is it's a one-time thing, and you know how many cards you're going to draw, which isn't bad, but especially in the same mana slot as Savannah Highmane, I don't see it being terribly viable, but as far as flavor is concerned, I do really like this card.
It does have some really nice flavor, especially the connotation back with Starving Buzzard. I don't think it would see a lot of constructed play in its current form, but I do really like just the idea of the card, and having later game draw, especially in Arena, I think would make Hunters a bit stronger in that format.
Next up, we've got Kaligos. The creator of this card put Warcry, but we're going to assume that that's supposed to be a battle cry. Its ability, it's a 7/9 for 9, and its battle cry ability is to put 2 random spells from your deck into your hand. For 9 mana, I don't know how useful this would be, especially because it's such a late game card, unless there's something in particular you're digging for, like a Pyroblast or maybe another damage spell to finish off your opponent. It feels a little underwhelming when you could just as well play Malygos and get more value out of the damage spells you already have. For his ability and his mana cost, his body isn't bad. He's only missing 2 attack from being vanilla passed, and he's not terrible. He's usable in some decks, but I would probably dust him.
I kind of disagree. I think Kaligos might be a little too strong, because he is a very late game drop and a legendary at that, but you're drawing cards from a smaller card pool, so you have a higher likelihood of getting what you want, assuming what you want is a spell. Malygos to Kaligos comparisons, Malygos will power up the spells that you already have, but since he's a 9 mana card, you probably aren't going to shoot off more than, say, a Sinister Strike. But with Kaligos, you set up for the next turn, and I think he would see a lot of play in some control decks, especially some of the later game mage decks with, like you said, Pyroblast. I think he would be a really nice combo with that.
I will give you that in a regular deck, like a mage deck, or pretty much any class except for rogue, it would be really hard to get Malygos to stick around, and Kaligos at least guarantees you a 2-for-1 trade, drawing 2 cards and then losing him if he were to die. At least with Kaligos, when you play him, you get what you pay for. With Malygos, you might get unlucky, and he dies immediately, and you got no use out of him. So I will offer you that. He is at least useful no matter what happens.
Although, we sit here comparing him to Malygos a lot. However, I think there's a much better comparison. Kaligos to Ysera. With Ysera, you're guaranteed one of the dream cards, and those dream cards are a lot more powerful. With Kaligos, you're guaranteed 2 spells. They're going to be less powerful, but with Ysera, you can potentially draw more and more and more. So, I think Kaligos might have a little bit of stronger comparison to Ysera, but with Kaligos thinning out your deck, drawing from a card pool that you control, and Ysera drawing from a stronger card pool with more potential. I do really love Kaligos, though. I think he's a very nicely designed card. Alright, next up is Interrogator Vicious. Interrogator Vicious is a 3-mana 2/2 legendary with Battlecry. Destroy your opponent's secrets and draw cards equal to the secrets destroyed. I really like Interrogator Vicious just because I feel as though there should be more interaction with secrets in Hearthstone. Just like Harrison Jones will take out a weapon and net you a lot of cards, Interrogator Vicious can potentially knock out 3, maybe even 4 secrets if your opponent is a secret-happy mage or hunter, and then net you a lot of cards. Even just against a hunter, on turn 3, they sometimes have a secret, and then later on you can pretty much guarantee against a hunter that you are going to get one. However, against the other classes, he's a 2/2 for 3 and very underwhelming.
Yeah, I had a lot of the same things to say as you did. Against a class with no secrets, or even against a deck that does have secrets but is not running them, he's very underwhelming. You know, he's a 2/2 for 3, no ability, but the same could be said about Harrison Jones. Against a priest or a mage, Harrison can't do anything, so I don't see that as a huge drawback. He's very situational. Now, against a hunter, especially against a trap hunter, he would be incredibly powerful. He only costs 3 mana, so you can use him to destroy enemy secrets and then safely play the rest of the cards in your hand. And the great thing about him is, because he destroys secrets on his battle cry, even a snipe won't stop him from destroying all of your secrets because the snipe activates after the battle cry. The only thing that I have left to say about him is if you ever get lucky enough to draw 4 or 5 cards off of him, that'd be amazing.
Probably end up in a Hearts Trollden video. I didn't actually think about that. He actually would take out a snipe before it could shoot him. That's something to consider.
Next up, we have Channeler, a 4/5 Shaman card for 4 mana. Battle Cry, remove all of your overload, lose 1 health for every point of overload removed. Now, when I first look at this guy, I think it's a Chillwind Yeti with an ability. But the thing is, I don't think its ability really gives it an advantage or a disadvantage over the Yeti, because you are paying health for how good his ability becomes. If you're getting rid of 5 points of overload, you're taking 5 points of health. But if you're only getting rid of 1 or 2, you're only taking 1 or 2 points of health. So it does end up balancing out. This would completely replace Yeti in any Shaman decks. And the interesting thing about him is because he only costs 4 mana, you could play something with an overload of 3, for example, and then play him afterwards on the same turn. You would take a little bit of damage, but it would absolutely wipe out your overload, whereas saving him for the turn after you've been overloaded would be a little less efficient.
I do like Channeler, and I also immediately saw the comparison to Chillwind Yeti. I think that Channeler might be a bit strong for what he is, simply because he is a quote-unquote better Chillwind Yeti, but like you said, he does have a downside, or rather, she does have a downside. I think that in a lot of Shaman decks, Channeler would potentially join alongside Chillwind Yeti, so that you could have basically 4/5 for 4s. I think Channeler is very strong and pretty well balanced, but maybe drop her to a 3/5. After that, we have the Chocl Chieftain. This is a warrior minion, a 4/2 for 6. Battlecry, activate a friendly minion's enrage effect and give it charge. I have actually thought about an effect like this for a while. The activation of an enrage ability without having to actually damage the minion. I think this puts it rather eloquently, and I really like that it also gives the minion charge. However, being a charge-giving card for 6 mana sort of makes the charge effect negligible unless you have 9 or 10 mana. Because really, what are you going to play alongside a Chocl Chieftain? Possibly Amani Berserker or Raging Worgen. That would be a very devastating effect, but I think the Battlecry activate a friendly minion's enrage effect is going to be the meat of this card. I really like it. The art on it is absolutely spectacular, and I think it's really well balanced too.
I agree with you about the card's art. I think it has really awesome art, but I also agree with you about the charge ability. If you want to give a minion charge, it has to cost 4 mana or less, and you have to play it first before playing Chocl Chieftain. So really what you're looking at here is the activate a friendly minion's enrage effect. That's much more important and much more valuable. However, paying 6 mana for it is a little weird, because if there's nothing on your opponent's side of the board that you could run into to activate an enrage effect, you're probably already in the lead or in a pretty good spot. I mean, I know there are some minions where you don't want to let them take any damage and you'd still like to activate their enrage effect, but it seems really situational, and for its mana cost it is a little underwhelming. I do have one question though. If you activated an enrage effect on a minion, would healing it get rid of the enrage effect, or would it be permanent? If the minion had 5 toughness and it dropped down to 3, would healing it back to full negate the enrage effect? Because when a minion has full health, it can't be enraged, but this card finds a way around that. So I'm just wondering how that would play into, you know, the healing mechanics and the negating of the enrage.
There's another question that I think we should bring up. It says activate a friendly minion's enrage effect. What if it's already enraged? Does it activate it twice? If so, does the healing only remove 1? There's a lot of questions to be had about Kor'kron Chieftain, but I think it's a really nice card as long as the specifics of it were more set in stone.
Alright, so next up we've got an Akanai Revealer. It's a 4/4 for 5 with a battle cry. Reveal enemy stealthed minions and gain +1/+1 for each stealthed minion it reveals. The way I look at this is a 4/4 for 4 plus the 1 mana needed to cast a Flare. But instead of drawing a card or destroying secrets with the Flare, this minion gains +1/+1 for each stealthed minion it reveals. These are hard things to compare, whereas you could compare a minion's attack and toughness easily to another card. But I think it's pretty balanced in terms of mana cost. The thing is, I think you're only ever going to get 1, maybe 2 +1/+1s out of this guy.
I am interested by Akanai Revealer. I find it very comparable to something like Harrison Jones or Blood Knight. Closer to Blood Knight. I still feel that the comparison to Harrison Jones should be made because Akanai Revealer is a 5-mana minion with a very situational ability that can be very strong. It should be noted, as opposed to Blood Knight, who destroys all Divine Shields, Akanai Revealer only reveals enemy stealthed minions, not your own. So you couldn't really abuse his effect to get a tremendous Akanai Revealer, but I don't think you would want to, because it only gets +1/+1 for the effect. I really do like the interaction with stealth, because I think Hearthstone needs more interactions with its keywords.
I think if stealth minions ever had a bigger surge into the current meta, this guy could be really popular. As it stands right now, the only stealth minions you really run across are turn 1 Worgen Infiltrators from Chocl or other rush decks, or the Conceal on Miracle Rogue. And if you do play this guy against a concealed Gadgetzan Auctioneer or Azure Drake on a Miracle Rogue, you're already spending 5 of your mana just to reveal them. So while it is useful, it's not terribly. So like I said, if the meta ever shifts to a more stealth heavy gameplay, maybe this guy would see more play, but like you said, for right now, he's a little underwhelming.
Next up is the Mulgore Huntsman, a 5-mana 4/4 with Battlecry, Destroy an Enemy Beast. Mulgore Huntsman is actually pretty comparable to Akanai Revealer. It's a 4/4 for 5 with a situational ability. Mulgore Huntsman is a nice card. I think it would actually see quite a lot of picks in the arena. Constructed play, I can't see anyone really running this, unless Hunters just became the most terrifying thing ever, which kind of are, but that's beside the point. I just like the idea of Mulgore Huntsman. He's an interesting card that makes beasts have one more thing to worry about.
I agree. I think Mulgore Huntsman would be a pretty good pick in the arena. He doesn't pass the vanilla test, so he's not always going to be useful, but he has an ability that can sometimes turn the tide of the game. I don't have a whole lot to say about this guy, as he's just a common with, you know, a standard ability, but I will say that I love the art they chose for the card.
It is quite good art. I really do like the whole cleaning the gun and him looking so fierce out. It's really nice.
Next up, we've got Shadow Thief, a 2/2 for 3. Battlecry, gain +1/+1 for every stealth minion on the board. Obviously, this guy is comparable to the Akanai Revealer. He costs 2 less, and also has 2 less from his attack and toughness. And when he gains his +1/+1, he does not take away the stealth from the minions. However, he gains his +1/+1 from every minion on the board, including your own. This guy could be interesting in a rogue deck, especially with Conceal. But for the most part, I don't think, just like with Akanai Revealer, I don't think Stealth sees quite enough play for him to be really needed in a lot of rogue decks. Every once in a while you might get lucky and play him as a 4-4 or even a 5-5, especially if you build a deck around him, but he's a little underwhelming, although I do love the art.
I do really like the art on Shadow Thief. It's very cool with the bow and the big cloak waving everywhere. I also like the effect. I like, as I've said before, I am a big fan of the keywords in Hearthstone, and I feel they should be used more. I like Shadow Thief as a card. It's usually probably going to be a 3/3. Maybe it's more, maybe it's less. Kind of like Van Cleef's little brother. But I don't think it would see much play with just the cards we have now. But potentially in future, Rogue could get more and more stealth cards, since that's one of the things they're really known for. And now for an interesting card, we have Lil KT. A 7-mana legendary 2/1 with Battlecry, destroy all minions with 3 attack or less. It should be noted that Battlecry effects trigger just before a minion actually enters play, so Lil KT would not destroy himself. I'm just sort of baffled by this card. It seems a bit too silly even for Hearthstone, and Hearthstone has Leroy Jenkins as not only a card in it, but a very strong one too. It's an interesting idea. I like the Battlecry effect. Sort of massive Shadow Word pains everywhere. But it just... the idea of a very young Kel'Thuzad running around Hearthstone shooting lasers out of his finger, it seems a bit much, even for Hearthstone.
I can see where you think the concept of the card is silly, however the mechanics of it, I really like. It costs 7 mana, which is a little much for its purpose, but it could stop Zoo dead in its tracks if you manage to stay alive long enough to play him, and since he's neutral, you could always throw one into your Druid deck. He can get past Taunt and destroy those annoying Blood Imps and Young Priestesses against Warlock. A lot of utility minions die to him immediately. I feel like he's a really good card. I think he's really situational, and he's not going to see play a ton, but I really like Lil KT.
I like Lil KT's effect. I like the mechanics of it. I think he may be a bit weak for his cost. Personally, I would drop down the cost a little bit so that his Battlecry was more and more effective. Because, like you said, it would be a fantastic counter to Zoo. Maybe 7. Or not 7, I'm sorry. Maybe make his mana cost 6, and I think Lil KT would be quite the strong legendary. It would certainly be hilarious to have your entire board filled up with Silverhand recruits that are being buffed up by your raid leader, and suddenly this guy drops on them and everything is gone. It would be quite a hilarious way to go.
I will agree that his mana cost should probably be dropped a little bit, especially for his attack and toughness. While his effect is the main reason you would play him, I still think there needs to be a bit of a bigger body left on the board for 7 mana. However, we can agree that his art's pretty cool.
His art is quite cool, I must agree.
So next up we have Enraged Owl Beast, a 4/3 for 4 with Battlecry, put 2 Moonfires in your hand. I really like this card, and obviously it's Druid only, but it's really nice because it's slightly lower than where it should be to pass the vanilla test, but you get 2 0-cost cards in your hand that deal 1 damage to any target. I think that's really balanced, makes up for his slight lack of stats, and I've always wanted to see more Moonfires in play. I've seen some Miracle token decks that were centered around Druid. This would be incredibly powerful in a Miracle Token Druid deck, because it gives you 2 more spells to use with your Gadgetzan Auctioneer, it gives you 2 more spells to create tokens with your Violet Teacher, and it has a decent body to stick on the board as well.
I do really like Enraged Owl Beast for just those reasons. It's not deal 2 damage divided as you choose, it's not put 2 little spells in your hand, it's all of those things. The fact that their spells makes a huge difference, the fact that their cards going into your hand makes a huge difference because you can play them at a later date. I would say Enraged Owl Beast is incredibly strong for its mana cost. I think Enraged Owlbeast would see play even if he cost 5, just because you can save those spells for later when you have a Violet Teacher or when your opponent plays something with Divine Shield. It's a very nice card. I absolutely adore the art, especially since he's sort of clutching a Moonfire in his right hand, talon, wing, whatever you want to call it. And I just really adore this concept.
Yeah, I have to say I agree with you. Out of all the cards we've looked at today, Enraged Owlbeast is probably my favorite. He's useful in all Druid decks. He's incredibly useful in Miracle Token. I think he's awesome.
I think he's pretty awesome too, although maybe not my favorite card of the ones we've looked at, just because a lot of these are really cool. But he does certainly go very high on my list. After the Enraged Owlbeast, we have Shadow Spy, another stealth interaction minion. This one is 4 for a 5/3 with Battlecry, give all other stealth minions +2 attack, and Shadow Spy himself also has stealth. Shadow Spy passes the vanilla test, having a total of 8 stats for 4 mana, with a very powerful Battlecry, potentially, and also stealth. Shadow Spy is an interesting card. Like I was saying before with the Shadow Thief, Shadow Spy acts as a sort of stealth lord, giving stealth more and more interaction with each other. And Shadow Spy could be absolutely devastating in... I suppose I could envision some sort of combo with Conceal. You get a lot of tokens on the board, play Conceal, and then play Shadow Spy as a sort of Savage Roar. It wouldn't be nearly as effective. But on the other hand, Shadow Spy is a 5/3 stealth for 4, just vanilla. That is pretty incredible, just stats right there. Shadow Spy might be just a hair too powerful right off the bat.
I had most of the same things as you to say about this guy, but you did make me think. In a rogue deck, which already has a ton of cheap spells, a rogue token deck with Violet Teacher, then Conceal, then Shadow Spy could be incredibly deadly. And you have to remember that because Battlecry abilities trigger right before the minion actually enters, he would not give himself +2 attack. But that doesn't change the fact that he is incredibly well balanced. He's actually very powerful in the right deck, and I would love to have this card implemented into the game. I think it's really cool.
I think it's a really cool concept too. I adore Shadow Spy. Not entirely certain on the flavor of why a spy is buffing up all of your other minions. Perhaps he's giving up some sort of scouting information of, oh, go over there and attack. But I really love the concept, and the artwork is pretty cool too. You can see him hanging over the rafters of a tavern, waiting and watching as gnomes are wont to do.
Okay, next up we have Sacrificing Cultist, a 1/1 for 5 with Battlecry, destroy a random minion, gain its attack and health. So in a way, he's a Void Terror that only targets one minion, but still gains its attack and health. This card is really situational, and if your opponent only has 1 or 2 minions out, it's a guaranteed 1-for-1 right off the bat. And sometimes it can be really powerful. Like if you get lucky and you're able to hit a Ragnaros with it, it could be incredibly powerful, a 9/9 for 5, and you've destroyed their Ragnaros. However, if you get unlucky and it hits one of your own minions, well, I guess that's just the RNG of Hearthstone.
Can you say Randuin Rin? I mean, Sacrificing Cultist is a very interesting card. And like you were saying, if they only have one minion, it is absolutely devastating. If you have a minion in your hand, it's a dead draw. If there's no minions on the board, it does nothing. It's a really interesting card, and I absolutely adore the concept of it. I have no idea whether this minion is balanced, it's too weak, it's too strong. Situationally, it is one of the most devastating plays in the game, right up there with Mind Control Tech stealing a Ragnaros. But at the same time, if you have even one minion, I can just envision this thing stabbing your vitally important taunt every time, and just having your enemies go right for your face. After the Sacrificing Cultist, we have the Shivara Demon. I think I pronounced that right. 4 mana for a 7/4. Battlecry, discard 3 random cards. Well, it's old Pit Lord, basically, mixed in with a little bit of Doomguard for good measure. Shavara Demon is a very interesting card, just because there are no cards that make you discard this many cards out of your hand. The thing to keep in mind about Shavara Demon is in a rushdown Warlock deck, you're probably not going to have 4 cards in hand. That would be 3, plus the 1 more being the Shavara Demon. But you are probably going to discard something off of her. Despite that, though, she has very low health, and I think she would be just a bit vulnerable at the 4 mana. There's a lot of cards that can take her out. Korkron Elite, Swipe, True Silver Champion, even though they would take basically 5 damage to the face. I like Shavara Demon, but she seems like a very risky all-in play.
I think Shavara Demon, well, at first glance, she's terrible. I mean, discarding 3 cards for something that's only a little bit over the vanilla test, it's not great. But then when you stop and think about what kind of deck she'd be played in, which would be Zoolock, usually turn 1, if you have the coin, you drop your coin and 2 minions. Turn 2, you might drop another minion. Turn 3, maybe you don't have anything to play, or you drop a life tap. And then by the time you get around to playing Shavara Demon, you're only discarding maybe 1 or 2 cards from your hand. It's still not great, and more often than not, you're going to be discarding your entire hand for her. But in a Warlock deck, that's not a terrible thing, especially not a rush deck. And her 7 attack, if you can even hit with it once, could change the tide of the entire game. Now, her 4 toughness, that is a problem. Like Chocl said, she can go down to True Silver Champion, she can go down to Swipe, she can go down from Eviscerate. She's very vulnerable, but she's not as terrible as she looks at first glance.
Well, I suppose it is kind of fitting that she is so vulnerable, because if she starts hitting your opponent with that 7 attack, maybe you've only discarded 1 card, so that kind of tempo can be absolutely devastating. Shavara Demon could see a replacement for Doomguard, potentially, but it's a very big risk, and I don't know, it's a very strange card. I kind of like it, and it's just an interesting card that I'm not sure I would have the guts to play.
Next up, we have Ashen Verdict Deathbringer, a 6/7, 4/7 with Taunt and Battlecry, Silence a minion. Now, we don't have any minions in Hearthstone that have Taunt and Silence, so right there it's bringing something new to the table. It slightly fails the vanilla test, but most Taunt minions do. I feel like it's a really, really powerful card for what it is. It could be compared to Lord of the Arena, who is just a big taunt, or even to Ironbark Protector, which is just a huge taunt meant to protect you. But with its Battlecry of silencing a minion, it can completely change the way the game's going just with this 1 card.
I absolutely adore Ashen Verdict Deathbringer. The 6/7 taunt for 7 is already pretty strong. With the silence effect coming into play, especially on a neutral minion, it suddenly becomes a very, very powerful rare. This card would see almost instant pick in Arena. I think it would find its way into Constructed a fair amount too, just because of how much of an immediate impact it has on the board. I mean, think about that. That's 7 health of taunt that your opponent has to get through. The 6 attack is going to be eviscerating their minions. And the silence means that potentially you've taken out one of their big buffs, or enabled your Ancient Watcher to attack now. And all in all, I think it's a very strong minion. It might be a bit too powerful, but I honestly think that I would leave it the way it is.
Alright, and our last card is the Almighty, and I'll let Chocl introduce this one.
So, for this week's Holy Shit card, this card deserves this title because of the absolutely gigantic text box. Look at that thing. Let me just read that out for you. Taunt, Divine Shield, Wind Fury, Battle Cry, all other minions lose taunt, deal 4 damage to all other characters for each taunt removed. All enemy minions cost 2 less next turn. Death Rattle, destroy all minions and deal 6 damage to the enemy hero. That is a mouthful. The Almighty is very mighty, to say the least. The thing about him, though, aside from having just this massive wall of text, is he just has so many abilities. So many different abilities. If it was one ability that was just really long and took some explaining, maybe I could see it, but it has all of these things on it. I like cards with multiple effects, but this is taking it to the extreme. Any one of these effects on a card, I think, would be a fantastic addition, but all of them stacked together is just too much.
I agree. Normally I don't feature cards that have this much text because 1, it's hard to read, and 2, there aren't any cards in Hearthstone with this much text. However, we do still have to discuss him, and here's the thing. He has Wind Fury, and he's hitting for 7 damage, so that's 14 if you let him live for a turn. He does have a downside, which is your opponent's minions cost 2 less on their next turn. I don't really know if that's enough of a downside to counter how powerful this guy is. When he first enters the field, all minions lose taunt, so if you don't deal with him immediately, he's hitting you for 14 in the face unless you can throw up another taunt. After that, he deals 4 damage to all other characters for each taunt removed. Even if there's only 1 taunt on the field, that can clear most of the board. After that, when he dies, destroy all minions and deal 6 damage to the enemy hero. So even if you're able to get rid of him, all minions on the board are gone and you've taken 6 damage, plus whatever you took for the taunts that were destroyed. Even if you can deal with this guy immediately, he's still going to take a good chunk of your health with him. And dealing with him alone is a problem. Yes, you could silence him, of course that's usually the best answer to cards like this, but if you don't have a silence, you have to not only deal 8 damage to him, you also have to get through his Divine Shield. He's incredibly difficult to deal with, and even if you do, he takes a lot of your health with you. I think this guy might be way too overpowered, but that's what a Premier Holy Shit card is supposed to be.
Very true. All of his abilities are interesting. I especially like the specifically removing taunt from minions, but there's just so many of them, all of them hitting you one after another. It's like, great, I have to deal with a huge Tyrion that also has Wind Fury, that also killed all my taunts, that also killed everything, that's also gonna kill everything again. It just goes on and on and on. The Almighty is a terrifying prospect to face. It's Deathwing on steroids. Deathwing was already on enough steroids.
Thank you guys for watching episode 3 of Custom Hearthstone Cards. I hope you enjoyed hearing myself and Chocl talk about the Battlecry minions that you sent in or that I found on the Custom Hearthstone subreddit. Next week, I'd like to challenge you guys to create some Death Rattle cards to celebrate the release of Naxx. When you do finish your cards, and there will be a link to a custom card generator in the description, you can send them to me via YouTube message, you can leave a comment on this video, or you can contact me on Skype or Twitter. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.
Goodbye, guys. See you in the Crypt of Naxxramas.